Alright guys, Abel here, back with another video, and today I want to talk to you about an important concept related to fat loss, which I think will be valuable for all of you. But before I get into that, I just want to give you a bit of an update on my own fat loss journey, which I just started 1 week ago. I put out the video discussing how I ended my bulk, and I'm going to do a fat loss phase for the next couple of weeks, and it's been going on for 1 week, and in short, it is going very well. I don't know exactly how much fat or weight I lost. I'm not monitoring the scale that super closely, but I can tell that it is working, and it is working fast. I started at around 92, 93 kilos, and today I weighed in just under 90 kilos. Obviously, I didn't lose 2 kilos of fat in 1 week, but with all the water, glycogen, and stomach content loss, that's kind of big losses anticipated in the beginning. And like I mentioned initially, my strategy is to simply eat as little as I can based on my appetite. So I am pushing myself as hard each and every day as I'm comfortable with, and probably on a fair amount of days I was in a really sizable deficit and probably ate well under 2,000 calories on many days, which sounds crazy because for a guy over 90 kilos that is a very low amount of intake. But again, I am not obsessing over the exact calorie number. I am just simply eating as little or as much as I need to based on my appetite. So I'm not pushing through crazy amounts of hunger. I am simply reducing my food intake while managing hunger to the best of my abilities. And this past week of fat loss already was actually enough for me to reinforce what I had believed for a while now, that not tracking calories and macros during cutting can not only be less stressful and just involve less overall headache, but it can actually be flat out more effective. Because just think about it, if I had actually tracked my macros in this past week, probably I would have messed around at 2,500, 3,000 calories or so, because I was eating like 4,000 before that. I didn't track it exactly, but probably upwards of 4,000. And simply going by appetite, I was able to create a really sizable deficit. And if you're a normal size guy or a guy my size, if you put yourself on 1,500 calories, that is really tough, if anything, from a mental perspective. Just that knowledge that, oh my God, I need to eat 1,500 calories, that is enough for me at least to make me obsess all day about, Jesus Christ, my intake is so low, how am I going to make it through the day? I'm surely not going to be able to sleep, and I'm going to be struggling with all these cravings and hunger and lack of energy, let alone my workout. I mean, that is going to suck big time. And this way, I am just eating naturally, and I just happen to end up at that intake. And logically speaking, it is how it should happen. I mean, I came off of a mass phase. I was eating a lot of food. I'm moderately high in body fat. I was probably ready for some pretty hardcore restriction. But by imposing this upon myself without actually consciously thinking about it all the time, it just happens organically, so to speak. So yeah, in short, it is going really well. I'm not monitoring the scale too much, and I'm not obsessing over measurements in general. I just know that I will probably have to end up at 85 to 87 kilograms at the end of this cut if I want to be at around 12% body fat. I mean, at my previous mini cut, I ended up at 83 kilos or so, and then I was at around 9% body fat. So this time I don't plan to get as lean, so probably 85 to 87 kilos is a reasonable guess, and hopefully I have actually built some muscle in this past mass phase, so maybe I will end up a bit heavier. So yeah, that is in short about my fat loss update, and now let's get into the concept that I want to discuss today, and that is fat loss momentum. So, by now I have a number of successful fat loss cutting phases under my belt, and I have a fair amount of experience with how to manage these things. And I've concluded by now that basically there are two aspects that you need to manage during a fat loss phase. One of them is the physiological side of things, and the other one is the psychological side of things. So by physiology, I mean the more concrete, practical things like managing food choices, your diet structure, overall lifestyle and environment management so that you're not struggling with more cravings and hunger than you really need to, making sure that you're actually in a deficit and you're not accidentally overeating by adding in too many things like ketchup and cocoa powder or other things that can rack up calories if you're not careful with them to some extent, making sure that over time you're staying in a deficit. So maybe as your metabolism or energy expenditure is dropping a little bit over the course of weeks, that you're still in a deficit and you're not just settling at maintenance or maybe start overeating slightly. These kinds of things are what I would classify as physiological aspects of dieting, and obviously you need to manage all of those. The other part of the equation is the psychological management of dieting, and that includes things like managing cravings, social events, peer pressure, maybe some comments that you might be getting from others saying that you're getting small and not losing sight of what you're actually trying to achieve. Maybe your own head is getting in the way because you're getting smaller, you're losing some strength, and that is messing with your head. These are also things that play into success on a fat loss phase, and obviously you also need to manage these. So basically during dieting, there are these two things that you need to battle with: the psychological and physiological hardships. And what's interesting is that these two things are going through a sort of interesting curve as you're dieting. From a physiological perspective, the beginning of a fat loss phase is actually pretty easy. You're moderately high in body fat, probably you just came off of a period of eating a fair amount of food, so your hunger levels are pretty manageable, your energy expenditure is fairly high, you don't even need to cut calories really hard in the beginning to lose fat at a pretty decent rate. Even if you're cutting calories pretty hard, you're not super hungry, and as you're dieting, your physiological battles are getting harder and harder. In the beginning, it's easy, and as you're getting deeper and deeper into your fat loss phase, it is getting increasingly challenging over time. And this sort of makes sense. I mean, you don't even necessarily have to have a lot of experience with this to intuitively know that this is the case. And the most extreme example of this is competitive bodybuilders getting ready for the bodybuilding stage. I mean, when they're getting rid of the final ounces of body fat, that is a massive, massive battle with your own body. But for us regular mortals who are, maybe getting down from 20% body fat to 10% body fat or so, it is not nearly as challenging, but still we may have to push through some hunger here and there. We may have periods during the day where we are looking up and we go, man, I could really eat something. And then you might have to say, you know what, my next meal is in 2 hours, so I will have some bubbly water or maybe some coffee, and I will distract myself with something, and I will make it through till my next meal. Now, on the other hand, from a psychological perspective, I think that this curve is actually the exact opposite. It is super, super challenging in the beginning, in my experience, and it is actually getting easier over time. And there are a couple of reasons why this is the case. The beginning of fat loss is when you're basically going through a big lifestyle transition. You may have to exclude certain foods that you've gotten used to eating. You're switching them up for something more satiating. You might have to get more strict with social events and things like that. And what's actually worst about all of this is that you're not really looking better in the beginning. You're eating less food, you are more restrictive, you're stricter with everything, and all you're noticing is that you're just getting smaller, and you're not really seeing the fruits of your labor. You're not really seeing yourself getting leaner in the places that you would want yourself to be leaner at, so your stomach might look the same, whereas your arms, shoulders, chest, all these areas might be shrinking up gradually. And actually, this is exactly what I'm going through right now. I mean, I am seeing myself getting a bit leaner, but after 1 week, what do you really expect? However, it is unquestionable that my arms, shoulders, chest has absolutely shrunk up. And this unfortunately simply comes down to the fact that it is not only fat that your body is depleting as you're entering a calorie deficit and sustaining that over time, but it's also glycogen and body water that your body is dumping in pretty high amounts in the beginning. So this is why people, when they are starting out with a cutting phase and before they have lost significant amount of fat, their body is going through what some people classify as the skinny fat phase. I think Jeff Nippert call it the fat and flat phase. I think the 3DMJ guys call it the tweener stage, where you're getting smaller but not really getting leaner. And this is something that everybody goes through in the beginning. And obviously it is not very encouraging to go through this, but over time, as your body is losing more and more fat, you're starting to actually get leaner, not just smaller. And that is when you're really starting to see the fruits of your labor. So all this is to say that the beginning of a fat loss phase is the most challenging from a psychological perspective. Over time, even though from a physiological perspective, it may be getting more and more challenging, you're actually getting more accommodated to the whole process of fat loss. You're used to eating your cutting foods such as salads and lower calorie fruits and lean protein. You're also getting leaner, so you're getting more and more positive reinforcement for your efforts, and it is getting more and more rewarding from a mental perspective. So if you were to plot something like quitting drugs or alcohol on a graph as opposed to fat loss on a graph, quitting something like alcohol is very hard in the beginning, both from a mental and from a physiological perspective. I mean, you're battling with all these withdrawal symptoms, and also you're just used to the behavioral aspects of drinking, but over time, over the course of weeks and months, it is getting easier and easier. On the other hand, when it comes to something like fat loss, it is super hard in the beginning from a psychological perspective, and it is very easy from a physiological perspective. Over time, however, your body is going to fight back against you harder and harder, but on the other hand, it is counterbalanced counterbalanced by the increased ease from a mental and psychological behavioral perspective. And that might be a good enough reason to actually push hard in the beginning so that your mind is getting the idea that it is working, you're on track, things are happening because there is no way that you're not in a deficit and that progress is not happening fast. And because physiologically you're more robust in the beginning, you are more likely to actually handle it initially. But know that for a while, you might actually not see yourself getting better and better in terms of aesthetics. But once you're past that tipping point, things are going to happen for you also from a visual standpoint. In my experience, that typically comes from at around the 4-week mark. Up until that point, it is actually not uncommon to look worse and worse for a while because you're just looking flatter, not significantly leaner. You might be getting rid of fat from places where you're just not that interested in, like your arms and shoulders, and maybe your posterior chain is getting leaner, which you're not even seeing on a daily basis, and your love handles and abs are looking exactly the same. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And many people see this. The first month of fat loss kind of sucks, and then you're looking leaner and leaner. And for example, I just saw a post from Eric Helms displaying his latest physique as he's getting ready for a contest, and he's at, maybe 7% body fat or so, and he is super, super lean, and probably he is struggling with quite some hunger from a physiological standpoint. I mean, there is just no way at this point how he can modify his nutrition and not be hungry at all. I think he even wrote somewhere that after every dinner, he just wants to eat a second dinner. But at the same time, he has just posted how his physique never looked as big and full at this body weight, and that he has hit an absolute PR in terms of body mass and leanness. And just imagine how empowering that must be at this point, that he is really seeing the fruits of his labor, and he's seeing that ultimate sculpture that he sculpted over time through training and dieting. And that is again the discrepancy between physiology and psychology. He's struggling the most at this point, but it is also the most rewarding for him from a mental perspective at this point. So if you're going through a fat loss phase at the moment and you're in the first couple of weeks, you're not even sure if it's working, you're not really looking the way you want to look just yet, just keep the faith because it is happening, and you're probably going to hit that tipping point where all of a sudden things are going to improve drastically from a visual standpoint. So just know that this is normal. This is the way fat loss goes almost for everybody. And sometimes you just got to suck up and trust the process. So hopefully this was encouraging if you're going through this right now. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. Like the video if you liked it, or dislike it if you disliked it. Let me know if you have any questions about fat loss or anything like that. I'm going to put out some more videos in the upcoming weeks about fat loss and cutting because that's what I'm going through at the moment. So hopefully it will be useful for you guys. So yeah, that's all I had to say for today. And with that, see you next time.